The transformation into a demon in the world of Kimetsu no Yaiba can result in a drastic change in your own personality and views as a human, usually resulting in the person becoming the worst version of themselves, either out of a feeling of being owed something by an unjust world, or their new forms giving their pre-existing twisted desires the right conditions to flourish. In a way, most demons become a shadow of their previous selves, and one of the demons who dwells on their shadow the best is the rough, radical rifleman relentlessly reducing residences to rubble, Hairo, the second-ranked Lower Moon Demon. This video contains spoilers for Kimetsu no Yaiba Gaiden, the stories of Water and Flame. If you want to avoid spoilers, you have been warned. Hairo is the major antagonist of the Kyojuro Rengoku Gaiden story of Kimetsu no Yaiba, and was the second-ranked Lower Moon Demon under Muzan's 12 Moon Demons, meaning he is the second highest rank we've seen from the Lower Moon Demons in the series. And what helps him stand out from his contemporaries was his utilization of modern weaponry to achieve his goals. And during his reign as a Moon Demon, Hairo claimed many Slayers' lives, collecting both their Nichiren hilts and information on one man, the former Flame Pillar, Shinjiro Rengoku. Though before we get too deep into that, let's understand the meaning behind his name and design. Hairo's design to me is one of the most striking in the series, with him wearing what appears to be a modified Taisho period military uniform. The same kind of uniform that would go on to inspire the school regalia that the Demon Slayer's own uniforms are inspired by, which might be a subtle way to reference his own swordsman past without outwardly saying it. Especially since, thanks to the black and white nature of the comic, his outfit fits perfectly into a yin-yang motif with the Demon Slayers themselves, even though in reality his outfit would likely be more green than white. Now Hairo also wears a cap and a cape, and it's possible that he does this because his design is in reference to the famous Demon Man sorcerer Yasunori Kato of Taito Monogatari, as Hairo targets the Japanese capital of Tokyo specifically when he does his demon activities, seemingly based on his own lingering hatred for the ever-changing empire, which is similar to one of the main motivations of Yasunori in Taito Monogatari. Also, Hairo's military visor has its standard star replaced with the emblem of a wolf surrounded by stars, which is related to his overall wolf aesthetic, from his spiky slick back hair to his sharp teeth, but also bangs that hang down from each side of his face which mimic the appearance of fangs. He also has facial features that match up with a wolf as well, like small eyes with black scleras, which match the sort of black outlines on a wolf's eye that make them look a lot smaller than they actually are. Though separated from all of this, we also have his demon markings that cover his face, that carry a very similar angular shape to his hair, though these designs hold another meaning to them, and I'll get more into that later. Now, Hairo's name, like all other names in Demon Slayer, contains with it a meaning that ties back to the character, either through their themes or characteristics. Now, in the case of Hairo's name, it is comprised of the characters for to wear, usually in reference to a sword, which could be foreshadowing his own true form, and wolf, which ties back to his previously mentioned wolf aesthetic, and when you read these two together, it helps give better context to one aspect of his blood demon art, which given his status as a moon demon, has become quite potent. This ability is Capture Cavity. Now, Capture Cavity, or Rakakuko, is a demon art that allows Hairo to completely manipulate his own shadow into a moldable cavity that functions similar to that of a hammer space, with a seemingly bottomless capacity. Using his blood, he can freely maneuver this shadow around his body, usually keeping it under his cloak or inside his uniform. This way he can defend himself from slashing attacks like a Nichiren Blade's beheading ability, as well as allow Hairo to attack with his stored items from anywhere on his body, which they all tend to take the form of a firearm, which makes a lot of sense. Given the Japanese reading of his ability's name, it can be understood as Spoils of War, which means it's likely that all of the weapons he possesses at one point were stolen from dead soldiers, except for one key item. Now, the arsenal in question that rests within Hairo's Capture Cavity is filled with a variety of firearms, all that match up with the time period of Demon Slayers, that of course being the Taisho period. So let's go through them all. Starting first with the Type B Numba, which was introduced in 1909, and it was a semi-automatic pistol that was meant to replace the Type 26 hammerless revolver. Along with this, he has a hammer-operated revolver as well, but instead of being a Japanese-style weapon, it would appear to be an American cult official police, which entered production around 1907. Now, besides his handguns, we also see him use rifles, starting first with the gun that helped revolutionize Japan's warfare, the arquebus, an ancient-looking musket that's not in service at the time but was likely not hard to find, especially not for a demon who originally lived in the 1800s. Then followed soon by the Type 35 and Type 30 bolt-action rifles that both entered service around 1902. And then, of course, the greatest shotgun ever made, the Winchester 1897, that became quite famous for its effectiveness during the Great War. But besides this arsenal of pillage guns, Hiro can also store his own trump cards, one of them being a top-loaded Gatling gun that he can mount using his body by producing its barrel from his stomach. Now, Capture Cavity can also store things other than guns, as Hiro can produce dynamite from his body as well. He can even light it too when he releases it. His shadow also seems to be able to operate the firearms themselves, allowing Hiro to attack from multiple angles with ease. Now, the influence behind this ability might come from Jujutsu Kaisen and its own 10 Shadows technique, which has a very similar property where Megumi can store objects within his shadow. Though, besides possessing the similar hammer space-like effect that the 10 Shadows technique has, Hiro can also shape his blood shadow into wolf-like creatures, similar in idea to the 10 Shadows' own divine dogs. These wolf shadows all possess a similar hammer space-like quality of his blood demon art, meaning that they can't be cut by normal means, catching the blade and the sort of sticky-like substance that they're made out of, unless slashed with a breathing style. As well, they can call forth guns to use in a similar manner to Hiro, and because they are made from Hiro's shadow, he can feel their presence at all times, which means he is aware if one or more of them get destroyed. Though, outside of the 10 Shadows inspiration, it is also possible that Hiro had another influence behind his blood demon art, which impacted both its usage and its design. This being Hellsing and one of the main protagonists, Alucard. More specifically, Alucard's control art restriction system, as Hiro's Capture Cavity is very similar in visual aesthetic to when Alucard allows his true form to come forth, and he becomes a shape-shifting glob of horror. I imagine that the ability assumedly draws a lot of influence from the first demonstration of these restrictions, seen in Volume 2 of Hellsing when Alucard fought against Luke Valentine. We also see that Alucard can create separate wolf-like creatures in a similar manner to the Shadow Wolves, even down to them being able to produce a gun and fire it from their mouths. Though, while Alucard's form brings fear to all who witness it, Hiro's blood demon art originates almost entirely out of his own fear, the horror that was forced upon him by the former Flame Pillar, Shinjiro Rengoku. As in the years before he earned the rank of Moon Demon, Hiro was a nobody demon roaming the streets of Tokyo, and during one of Shinjiro's patrols, the Flame Pillar drunkenly stumbled upon him, and in a rageful, grieving state, he decided to torment and mock the demon. He would chop his body to pieces and ridicule it for having fear. Strangely though, he never killed him, and it was this interaction that scared Hiro to the core, not only physically, but mentally. As no matter how strong he had gotten from that point on, he would always find himself overcome with fear and uncertainty in his actions, only being able to ever calm his nerve by shooting himself in the head and physically clearing his mind. And it was thanks to this repeated damage to the brain that resulted in Hiro's own personality shifting as well. Soon, his fear would turn to motivation, and he swore to himself that all he needed to do to overcome this hardship was to kill the man who'd scarred him so deeply. Thus, he began assembling an arsenal and mastering the arts of firearms, as they were weapons proven to be superior to swords in the past, and if he was going to hunt a swordsman, he would need the upper hand. But in doing so, Hiro never realized that he had become the thing he hated most. As long before he was a demon, Hiro was a member of the Shinsengumi, a special police force established by the Tokugawa shogunate and comprised of many different samurai clans as well as ronin, all with one goal of protecting the shogunate's power during the slow modernization of Japan that had begun to take place. They were in a way the last bastion of a slowly dying generation of Japanese, those who lived and died by the code of Bushido. And while they were successful in uncovering plots of conspiracy and ultimately helping keep the shogunate in power for a short period of time, eventually they, as well as the government they served and protected, would see a fall at the end of the barrels of the modern Japanese warrior. And with power stripped from the shogun and returned to the emperor in Tokyo, the Shinsengumi, along with Hiro, were left with nothing. And soon their numbers would be reduced to zero after multiple conflicts conflicts with the current Japanese Empire, with Hairo participating in one of these Shinsengumi final stands, as he was gunned down by the soldiers who mocked his outdated belief in Bushido and his reliance on a sword. Though, in a somewhat similar fashion to how Shinjiro struck fear in him, he scared the soldiers who gunned him down, standing strong in his beliefs after a barrage of lead had left his body nearly lifeless, and he continued to fight with his sword to the bitter end. Hairo believed hard in the practices of the samurai, and specifically the Shinsengumi, with the deeming markings on his face even resembling the flag of the organization. Hairo always wearing the stylings of his old life, even after death, which is very similar to other powerful demons in Kimetsu no Yaiba, as even though these memories of his human life had lodged themselves away deep in Heiro's subconscious, we can easily see how they did affect and guide his actions as a demon, with him targeting Japan's capital of Tokyo out of hatred for its current government and its emperor, and when he encountered a powerful swordsman who struck fear in his heart, the only response was to emulate the men who had gunned him down when he stood against those soldiers in a similar manner. Though, when fighting against Kyojuro Rengoku, the son of the man who drove him to that point, Kyojuro withstood a similar barrage of bullets that Hairo did, but he stood strong in a very different fashion. But there was no hatred in his eyes, only determination, a fiery passion to defeat the monster that stood before him and protect everything he believed in. Eventually, this determination drained Hairo of all of his ammunition, and while in a desperate need to find any form of weapon to defend himself, his capture cavity produced an old, weathered katana. Its steel worn by blood and age. It was his original katana from the days as a Shinsengumi. And with it came all the memories of who he used to be, and in an instant, Hairo recalled all of his wolves to himself and awoken a new form of his blood demon art. This being its true form, the Werewolf of Horror. The name of this attack is a mixture of all of his themes so far into one. Firstly, Werewolf. It's a mixture of the Spoils of War ability name along with werewolf, as he assumes a half-man, half-wolf appearance. Then of course we have a horror aspect, which references the process that drove him to this point, but also possibly leans on the Hellsing inspiration. Along with this, his design seems to take inspiration from Berserk, and more specifically, Guts' Berserker armor. Now while in his werewolf state, Heiro's mind becomes calm and fully aware of his old skills. He even refers to himself as a Ronin, or a lone swordsman, which also plays into the motif of a lone wolf. He is also completely protected from any weaker slashes, as the cavity effect prevents any harm from reaching his main body, meaning that the only way to defeat him at this point is to cleave through him and his armor in a single powerful blow. And it is the same light that burned him once before that now clears the darkness of his blood, the luminescent swordsmanship of the flame-breathing style, Rengoku defeating him with his family's final technique. And it is his interaction with Kyojuro here that is one of my favorite in all of Demon Slayers, as it shows a core element of the series when it comes to fights. Rengoku, through his fiery passion and willingness to protect others, helped a demon come to understand himself and no longer be lost in his own past, giving him both clarity of mind and an honorable duel to the death via sword, a fate he was robbed of all those fateful years ago. But, at the same time, it never forgives Heiro's actions. It acts as sort of a stern kindness, one not so uncommonly shown by Tanjiro later in the series. And it just shows how connected Kyojuro and Tanjiro are as characters, as to them, these demons were all once human, and they've all experienced hardships in some way, and while some of them have embraced being monsters, others were given no other options. And Hairo, for as short-lived of an appearance that he makes, is a perfect example of what makes Kimetsu no Yaiba's writing so good, and it's why I love coming back to the series and rereading the fights. And Ryoji Hirano shows a total understanding of the series when it comes to writing these Gaiden stories, and I can only hope to see more from them in the future, especially if we get more insight into other pillars and see more demons like the Lone Wolf Hairo himself. Now, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MediNotTheBadGuy. Every little bit helps keep this channel flowing as smoothly as it does. And if you want to learn how to expand your own naturally built capture cavity to an unlimited capacity, well, you can do so by buying a copy of Shimonetta, A Boring World Where the Content of Dirty Jokes Doesn't Exist at buyshimonetta.com.